do part this Sunday and part next Sunday. And anybody that's ever been divorced or have friends that are divorced, please don't think you should stay away from this lesson today or next week. Been kind of hard putting this together to make sure I say the right thing. I started on some of these and I was running like 4 weeks ahead. So I've had 4 weeks to work on this, and when I get through, you'll say, well, after 4 weeks, you could have done better than that. But every time I go into it, I got to have another word right here. I want it to be right. I got to be careful. But you have to tell it like it is. So Jesus is up on the side of the mountain, his disciples at his feet, and thousands of people down there in the Sermon on the Mount. And he's got one thing in common with everything he's been saying. You have heard it said of old this, but I say that. And what he's talking about, everything you've heard has been physical, but I'm telling you, it's internal. What's inside that counts too. And for the Jews that are among that crowd, which is mostly the Jews, they've not heard that before. All they've heard is from the Pharisees, and you got to obey the law. Physically, all these things. So Jesus is just doing one after the other after the other. So Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in adultery with her in his heart. Now we could also change that around and say any woman that lustfully looks at a man. It goes both ways. I don't think it was that. It's just the way it was written originally. This is one of the greatest examples of the teachings of Jesus that show that the law is certainly to be applied physically. And the physical actions, he's not taken away from that. Yeah, that's said and that's true. But it's also to be applied to the condition of the heart as well. You know, we talked about this 2 weeks ago when we talked about murder. And we said, well, I didn't kill anybody. Yeah, but you could have killed somebody mentally. You could have said some words that just killed them on the inside. That's what Jesus is talking about. What's on the inside. Thou shalt not commit adultery. There's no way of whitewashing or diminishing the meaning of this commandment. We can't say, oh yeah, but we're not going to have any of that. It is what it is. It is what it is, or it is what it says. All right. First, we'll address the physical act of adultery, and then we will address the internal act of adultery. Remember the story of the Pharisees bringing a woman to Jesus that was caught in the act of adultery? The Pharisees said to Jesus, the Mosaic law commands us that such a person should be stoned. But what sayest thou? Obviously, they're trying to trick Jesus. They're always trying to trap him on this. So they said, well, the law says you're to stone him. Jesus, are you going to go against the law? Jesus responded, let he that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone at her. Now, Scripture tells us that Jesus wrote something in the dirt. And the Pharisees begin to leave one by one. What did Jesus write in the dirt?
Don't know.
Who said that? Don't know? That's a good answer.
I think maybe he was writing the sins of the people standing looking around.
Okay. Very good. Very good. First of all, this no one really knows was the correct answer, but many opinions. And I too have an opinion, or maybe just interesting thinking. Anybody else have an opinion besides Sandra what Jesus might have written in the dirt? Y'all like what she had to say? Well, good. That way I don't have to call on you. You agree with her. I like to think that Jesus wrote the name of a woman, maybe a prostitute, that some of the Pharisees had been with, or more than one prostitute's name in the dirt, and then look down there and think, whoa, I'm out of here. Or maybe just a single sin, like she said, Sandra said, he wrote a sin down there that they were all guilty of. Whatever he wrote, they all looked down there and said, well, I'm not without sin, so I can't cast this stone. And they walked away. They walked away. Can this sin be forgiven?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Of course it can be forgiven. What did Jesus say to this woman? Let's read it from chapter 8 of John. Jesus said, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? And she said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Did he forgive her? He did. He did. Now we all know that this is one of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. So what is the meaning of adultery as described in the Old Testament? We'll read it from the Old Testament scriptures. The man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, and the adulteress and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. If a man be found lying with a woman married to a husband, then they shall both of them die. Both the man that lay with the woman and the woman, so shall they be put away, evil from Israel. And there's much more on this subject if you read Leviticus 20, and it's kind of another subject, but as it goes down, then it starts talking about men with men, women with women, men with animals. I mean, all of that. You can go and read all of that stuff on there. A man does not lie with a man, and a woman does not lie with a woman. Another lesson, but that's right in this same chapter 20, right here where we were reading. The definition of adultery. Adultery is defined as voluntary sexual intercourse between a married person and someone other than their lawful spouse. Fair definition? Nothing wrong with that. It is considered a serious breach of the marital bond, and it is addressed in many legal, moral, and religious contexts. Explain that a little bit more. What was the punishment for committing adultery?
Death.
Death. We read it in Leviticus chapter 20, but I'm going to read it one more time. Shall surely be put to death. Is adultery still a punishable crime in the United States today?
No.
Yeah.
Anybody want to say yes?
Should be.
Yes. Yes, but only in 16 states.
Wow.
Is Texas one of those states?
Not answering.
No, it's not one of them. 16 states. Is the crime of adultery punishable by death in any of these 16 states?
No.
Got that part right. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Crimes for adultery vary from anywhere from 90 days in jail plus a $500 fine up to 4 years in prison in these 16 states. They vary in these 16 states. Yes?
Have you ever heard of anyone actually paying the $500 or the?
Oh, I paid over $1,000
Shame on you.
You must do
to bail someone out.
Oh.
Did I get out of that all right? No, And we're going to touch on what you just said there. Have you ever heard anybody do that? It's coming up on some slides about that same information on here. That's right. So here we talk about a sin versus a crime. We've seen where adultery is considered a crime in only 16 states, and most likely it's no longer or tried or punished anywhere. You get old laws on the books and they just never get deleted. Did you know in Texas, if you get caught on somebody else's property and you have a pair of fence cutters in your pocket, it's a punishable crime. Very fun. Matter of fact, by hanging. And it's still on the old Texas laws. Now, do they do that? No. They just don't take the time to go clean them up. So these 16 states, most likely there's not. You know, sin, it's a sin, but it is a crime, a punishable crime. No, well, why not? Okay, let's look further. But what about the sin? Is it punishable? We said the crime, it's not being punished anymore, but is the sin punishable? Well, yes, it is. The sin of adultery. How was King David punished for murder and adultery? How was David punished?
His baby was killed.
Yeah. The death of the child that was born to David and Bathsheba was killed. God took him. Punishment, yes. Does God forgive? Yes, when you ask him. But it does not necessarily take away punishment for the sins. What about the woman caught in the act of adultery? Was she punished? Don't everybody answer at once. Unknown. Sandra's good word back there she used earlier. Unknown. We don't know.
My question is, where was the man?
Yeah.
She didn't commit adultery by herself.
Okay, it was only the Pharisees that brought her.
Right.
So it was the Pharisees that were guilty of not bringing them both.
Right.
Correct. But remember, the men in those days didn't really respect women as they should in those days. And we'll get into more of that next week's lesson
Could have
too.
been one of the Pharisees that brought her.
Yeah, I think if he'd have been caught, he'd run. Okay, so we don't know whether or not she was punished. So we can only guess. Why is there so much leniency when God said both parties should be put to death? Why didn't Jesus have her put to death? It seems that over time, this is for today, it became harder and harder to define and enforce these laws. Now, we're not talking about the sin, but the crime. It seems over time it became harder and harder to define and enforce these laws. Plus, it became more and more accepted as a sin and not a crime in our world today. And many of them don't even accept it as a sin. Adultery is intercourse with someone other than your legal spouse. That's the definition. So you're not going to hear about anybody going to court for that anymore. But there is punishment. The purpose of the commandment against adultery was to sanctify the marriage as a union between one man and one woman. That was the purpose. Any activity outside of that, other than the spouse, is adultery. Before we cast judgment on others, remember what Jesus said? Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. That doesn't just apply to this sin of adultery. That applies to any sin. Before we say, I'm glad I'm not like Paul over here because I know what he did. No, you don't do that. But Jesus had more to say on adultery. Remember, we got our own sins to worry about rather than pointing out those of others. Sorry, didn't warn you I was gonna do that. At least I didn't.
I did it.
But I didn't name the sin, because your wife is right there, I didn't want to tell. Thank you for letting me pick on you. But Jesus had more to say about adultery. You know, we've been talking about this thing of physical and internal. And you heard it said, of all thou shalt not commit adultery. Okay, then he said, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now it also applies with any woman that lusts after a man. So don't think it's just a one way. Wow. So what was the message that Jesus was teaching when he said, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart? Not the physical act, but you committed it in your heart. Jesus was not emphasizing the sin of adultery so much as the condition of the heart and the soul of a person. In Proverbs it says this, it makes a lot of sense. For as a man or a woman thinketh, so is he or her in his heart. So is he or her. Whatever you're thinking, that's what you are in your heart. What is the key word in this statement by Jesus? What's the key word here? Take a shot at it.
Heart,
Huh?
heart.
Yep. Lust or lustfully. That's the key in this whole sentence. That's what he's keying on. In the New Testament, the original Greek word was epithemio. I think I got it right. Which means desire or long for. These terms reflect a strong and often inappropriate longing and craving for lust. I don't think we have any problem as adults understanding today's word, what lust is. Okay, I searched a lot of commentaries on this subject. I mean, a lot of different pastors, Bible scholars, everything. And I chose to share with you a good commentary from the Life Application Bible. I didn't think you needed it to be just my opinion. I wanted it to come from a sound Bible. Is a good one for this. The Old Testament, it comes right from, this is the footnotes in the Life Application Bible. The Old Testament law said that it was wrong for a person to have sex with someone other than your spouse. But Jesus said that the desire to have this sex with someone other than your spouse is mental adultery and thus a sin. Well said. Do you agree?
Yeah.
It is. It's well put. And I can do that and say it's not my words. Jesus emphasized that if the act is wrong, so is the intention or the thinking is wrong. That's what he's emphasizing. To be faithful to your spouse with your body but not with your mind is to break the trust so vital to a strong marriage. Jesus is not condemning this is close. Look at this closely. Jesus is not condemning the natural interest in the opposite sex. There is natural or even admiration of a person of the opposite sex. It's not wrong. But the deliberate and repeated, and I think repeated is important, filling of one's mind with fantasies that would be evil if it were acted out. That kind of makes sense what this person's saying, I think. Okay. Based on what we just read, now I can say what I believe based on what you and I just read together here. It is natural and most common for one to notice a beautiful or good-looking body and even admire it. It's okay. When you're watching the Miss America pageant, what are you doing? You're admiring sometimes the face, maybe the hair, maybe the body. Look at the long legs on that lady. Oh, wow, she's beautiful. That's not lust. That's just admiration on there. But it is when you let your mind begin to fantasize and let your imagination start to linger about that person's body, that's when it becomes sinful. Make sense? Okay, I think it's a fair statement on that. See how I say this. I was going to do something and I said this wouldn't work. I was going to have all the women go out of the room. I was going to talk to the men. Then I was going to have the men go out. I was going to talk to the woman. And I was afraid Glenda would kill me. So here's the deal. Glenda and I, sitting in the church towards the back, we noticed the girls that walked through with real short skirts. We noticed it. And we will say one to you, look at that. Isn't that terrible? Now, if I took it further than that and I start lusting or thinking of other things that are sinful, then that's when it becomes lustful. But to recognize, but there's also nothing wrong. So we point that out. We see that and we think, God, that's not good. If a guy is in the grocery store and a girl comes down the aisle and she's got low cut and a lot of exposure, do you think the guy's not going to look?
Of course you
It doesn't mean he's lusting.
Oh, really?
Well, Nick may be a different animal. I don't know.
Nick, you got a tough one there.
You can't not see that. Now, here's why I was going to have the women in here and the men out. But what do the women look at that grabs their attention? Okay.
gotta handle it.
I'll volunteer for that. When
Good.
I used to do bike rides,
Yeah.
you know, and everybody's got on shorts.
Yeah.
And there are some guys that have got some drop dead looking legs.
Maybe a nice tush.
You don't see that because it's on that little seat about that wide. You see the muscles and as you're riding, you see the muscles work. And it's nice to look at.
Okay. You see their butts too.
Not on the bike.
Well, when they get off, you do. With those tight pants
I
they
must not
have.
be a butt person.
Okay.
I'm a
So-
big person.
You can't not see these
No.
things, okay? That's not that's not lust. I mean,
That's right. I'll tell you, I had people on bike rides that would be coming up behind me and they would they'd kind of yell out too, boy, you got some great legs. Then they'd get up beside me and see my gray hair and they'd go, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. And I've had that happen to me a few times.
I'm so glad you were in class today. So I think we see what we're saying, that you cannot not notice, and it's okay to do that. It's okay to admire. That's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean that the lust is behind it. You watch the beauty pageant. You look at the legs. You look at, and then we have the swimsuit contest. And they have bikinis on when they come out now. Women and men both are looking at that. Now, if the guy starts to fantasize about that, now you're leaning towards lustfulness and you don't want that to happen. In the same way with women, if they see on the beach the guy with the Speedo bathing suit on, and you look at it and probably say, oh my gosh, like that. But
You shouldn't be wearing
we just want to be sure that this thing that says it's natural and it's common to notice beautiful or good looking bodies. It's also common to notice bad looking bodies too. When you see them, oh my
Y'all those
gosh.
men in Speedos that shouldn't be in Speedos.
Now she's getting personal.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's out there and not up here. Okay, well, so she's helped me out a lot today. Okay. You would think if I spent 4 weeks on that, I'd have a better lesson. But every time, every day, I'd go back in there and I'd start. That's not a good word. Or I need to change that sentence. And it's been one of the hardest I've ever put together to still be honest with everything with you, you know, and to be truthful on it and to cover it in a good way. Okay, so Jesus followed this up with adultery, saying you've committed adultery in your heart already if you lust after the person. And then he followed it up with these two verses. He said, if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of the members should perish, and not the whole body should be cast into hell. We're going to get to explanations in a minute. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not the whole body should be cast into hell. Does that seem kind of harsh? We know that Jesus often used exaggerations and as well as parables. He used exaggerations. It's like Steve Hunter back here saying that he was so hungry he could eat a horse. Now, we know Steve didn't mean that he would really eat a horse.
Oh, yes, I would.
He might. If his finances get too low. He was just stressing how hungry he was. Same way with Jesus was not telling you to pluck your eye out, cut your hand off. He was just stressing the importance. Let's go further with it. In summary, what Jesus is saying is any part of the body causes you to stumble and fall away from God, it is better to remove that part of the body and live in self-denial than to continue down the same path and end up in the burning lake of fire. Jesus didn't really mean for you to gouge your eye out or cut your hand off. He is stressing the importance of, here it is, getting rid of sinful habits. I think I explained that a little bit. Paraphrase is what I did. It's better to do without what seems to be fun and pleasing at the time. This is fun. This is pleasing. It's better to get rid of that. It's actually a sin than in a short life on earth than to suffer in hell for eternity. We need to get rid of things that are sinful in our lives. Today, the world is really getting back to the old saying of, I forgot my saying. Live it for today. What was it? Somebody help me. Where was it? There was.
You're just getting old, like the rest of us.
Give us a hint.
Live
for today. It's like they're saying, live and do what you want to.
Because tomorrow might not come.
Not exactly, but yeah, live your life like you want to. Fun and pleasure. That's the world today.
Eat, drink, and be merry.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I was going to eat, drink, and be merry. Or tomorrow you might die, but they don't do that part. Just eat, drink, and be merry. Do what you want to. Do what you want to is in our world today. And they're doing it. I watched a video and they were interviewing some people. Well, no, it was that Dr. Phil that you sent me, Gary, when he was talking to some people that were in the business world, and they said generation, what do they call it, Z or Zen?
Oh, yeah.
Z. They don't want to work. And they interviewed
Yeah.
a lady, and she was a young lady in her middle 20s, and she said, I don't want to work my whole life. I don't want to. I don't want to work. And said that's very, very common. And one of them said, well, I hired one, and she said, I have a law office, and gave her a nice office. And she was in the office, and I went in there on day 2 and walked in there. She had her feet up on the desk, and she had a coffee pot that she brought in on her own, sat up there, and she was talking on her cell phone to her friends, with her feet up on the desk. Day 2 on the job, it's a business owner. One more. One guy said, in my work, we found out one of our employees, he had got kicked out of his apartment So he was living in his office, and he'd been living in there for several days before we figured it out. Living in the office. And they, you know, finding young people to work hard, they're saying is getting harder and harder with these new generations going. And yet I look at my grandkids and see what they've done. I've got 2 in college, and they've worked jobs, and they don't seem to have a problem. But I guess there's a problem with a lot of the generation out there. But that girl said, I don't want to work the rest of my
You
life.
remember what he said? He says, do you ever get hungry?
Yeah, you ever get hungry? Okay, so these little things that seem happy and fun and pleasurable, but some of them are really sins that are fun and pleasurable. And Jesus is saying it's better to get rid of them, just like cutting your hand off. Get rid of that. And don't live that kind of life on there. Next is divorce, but we're going to do it next week. Please don't anybody stay home. I think if I can handle this subject on adultery, I think I can handle this without killing anybody. Sandra, you going to be here next week? I need you. Yeah. Here's a lady been married 3 times. All three to the same guy. I just want y'all to know, so if you didn't know. Thank you for putting up with me on this. I'm going to do, I don't know if Steve Stone comes up next or not. I can't remember. Like Willie said, I'm getting old like the rest of you. But we'll close out with a song, and then we'll end up. So you can cut it off.